classical music. Some history about classical music. It became more popular after famous composer Johann Sebastian Bach passed away in 1750, and that's when composers stopped following the strict rules of Baroque music because it was overly intricate and too complex. So they instead favored classical music, which featured multiple instruments all playing one melody in their own range. Some demographics and statistics. Most classical music listeners are middle-aged or older. Classical music is a Western style of music that began in Europe following the end of the Baroque period, and it lasted until the early Romantic musical period began, which was around 1830. And in its time, classical music was wildly popular amongst all ages. Some basic tenets and belief systems in classical music. So rules for composition and performing classical music are less strict than Baroque style music, but there still are loose guidelines and terms to help guide a musician through a piece. For example, in a three-movement piece, the first piece should be fast-paced, the second slow, and the third should be fast again. Dynamics, which is the volume of noise produced by instruments, are very important, and it is believed that composing a classical piece should be similar to writing a story. Some cultural particulars include that most classical music doesn't have lyrics or vocals, and if they do, they're in opera style. Work is entitled a piece rather than a song, and they're played on specific wind, brass, string, or percussion instruments. And it's almost all produced with natural sound, which means there are no computers or electronic sounds unless you're using an amplifier or a microphone. Some material culture could be anything used to play music. So music stands, concert instruments, classical sheet music, batons, and musicians themselves. Some non-material culture. Values include moving a person through music with natural sound and no vocal accompaniment. Beliefs would be like songs don't need lyrics and they can be naturally created beautifully. Some norms are compositions for full symphonies or played with a concert band, orchestra, or symphony. And some symbols would be the classic works that inspire new pieces. Some cultural capital. Objectified capital would be instruments, sheet music, or anything used to play classical music at all. Embodied cultural capital would be joining a concert band to play classical music and practicing on your own time. And then institutionalized capital would be studying music theory and applying that to playing, or seeking a music degree and applying that to your knowledge of classical music. Society's view of classical music today. It used to be the most popular genre of music in its time, but today it's rare to see a person who listens to classical music just because they enjoy that sound. But sometimes it's common to hear that classical music helps the mind focus, and so lots of people use it to study. It's most commonly heard today in live performances rather than on recordings. And it's kind of become an event for people because most of the time people listen to it is when they're at a concert performance. For conformity, since it isn't very popular anymore, it's not quite as common, but there are still over 300 members of PB's band, and not everyone joins just out of interest. Some join because their parents expect them to, or because they have friends in band, which are both examples of conformity. Classical music does connect to everyday life in a couple ways. There are classical pieces composed for just about any topic anyone could think of, so it's very applicable to anything. Also, multiple countries' national anthems are classical style, and those are listened to a lot. And many students prefer to study with music and usually choose to listen to classical music since it's known to increase focus and productivity. It connects to society in multiple ways. Many religions use hymns, some of which are composed in a classical style. For technology, it's not uncommon to hear classical music used in the background of movies, TV shows, or advertisements. For social movements, the Revolutionary War was right in the middle of the classical music period. So movements like the Boston Tea Party, which was to protest tariffs on tea, and then the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution were all right in the middle of the classical music period. The British Industrial Revolution also was at the height of classical music's popularity. Social class and stratification. Classical music was performed live and was often portrayed as being for the rich, since it was either played at concerts or high-profile balls. So only famous or high-profile individuals could afford to attend or were invited. For song analysis, I chose The Marriage of Figaro Overture. It's a Mozart piece, and it was created to make a person feel both delighted and poised. It's one of Mozart's more popular and sophisticated pieces, and it's still very well known today. This piece, along with other Mozart works, is often heard in commercials and ads because they want to appeal to a person's want for sophistication or classiness. The second song I chose was Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. This is likely Beethoven's most famous piece and arguably the most recognizable classical composition of all time. The piece was created to be harsh, brash, and repetitive. The motif pattern of the piece begins with string instruments, and the pattern goes short, 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 long. And as the piece moves on, more instruments conform to create a harsh and brash pattern. Through key changes and separate movements, the one pattern remained the same, creating possibly the most well-known classical pattern in history. For my last song, I chose 1812 Overture, which is a Tchaikovsky piece, and it was kind of controversial in its time. It's still used in a lot of films today, and it has an interesting story of its own. The piece was originally composed to tell the story of the victory of Russia's forces over Napoleon's French forces. The opening of the piece is meant to symbolize a call to God and is softer and a little bit slower, but then it rapidly picks up about 4 minutes in to simulate the battle between Russia and France. Though it doesn't have a specific call to action, this piece is also commonly used in advertisement. The urgent feel of the piece is used to strategically urge consumers to jump into a purchase without thinking it through entirely, while also portraying a product as grand. These are my sources, and that's it.